This is the backup plan. If you don't qualify worlds, this is the backup plan. I was wondering where you went. I'm gonna put my stuff here. Actually, can I get the fancy chair? Sure. If you dare.
Well,
I took the fancy chair.
Miss Dead Center.
You missed out, so let's take a I think it's like the only place that can go out. There he is.
Speaking of orange.
Hi.
Yeah. You were.
Orange, take a seat at the end. I thought you were doing a new list.
We'll give people lunch one.
Well, my shirt. I got yeah, 5 things in practice.
Actually,
Yeah.
That's funny.
Like my friend who goes to fountain was like really bad.
See what's for free.
No, I had to pay. But
People.
but they reached out to me and were like, this is not a question.
This is not negotiable, you're really. In the relationship.
How's everyone doing today?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm pretty good. Yeah, we'll just give it a couple minutes.
Oh, I just see it.
No, you have it. This is new.
This is new one? Oh.
This is brand new.
Oh, wait, because it says. Old one was just shaker.
I finished these slides last night. You have not seen them.
You know, that's
Yeah.
What? You know, if I had a sister cool size.
That was false. There's your
Let's give it another minute or two. Just kind of curious. Who here? This is 2023 is going to be their first season of First Robotics. Cool. We got a few new people. Welcome. Who's going to be in their second year? Cool. It'll be nice to have some variety in here. I hope this talk is someone for everyone of all experience levels. So. Also, just out of curiosity, who went to the Scouting 101 presentation this morning? Come on, have a seat. Cool. All right. Alright, just gonna let this let everyone coming in now take a seat. There's still a few seats open. Yeah, this is Scott. Come on in, have a seat. There's still some chairs. We can also maybe move like this to be not like directly in front of the thing. Alright, cool. Also, is this anyone's phone? I'm gonna put this over here. Alright, let's get started then. Alright, hi everyone. My name is Brian Marr. I'm a mentor for FRC Team 333 in Brooklyn and also Team 7407 in Connecticut. And I've been doing FRC since my freshman year of high school in 2012. So it's been a minute. I've learned a few things that I want to share with you. So this talk is called Less is More, Making Better Picks with Less Scouting Data and Better Analytics. So I haven't done this talk before. Feel free to come on in. I haven't done this talk before. There's a bit of a new angle on it. So my focus on this talk is going to be helping, sharing some strategies for figuring out what data to collect for your team's scouting efforts and how to sort of make the most out of analyzing it. So just give a quick overview of how this is going to work. I'm going to talk a little bit about, before you get started with scouting stuff, figuring out kind of your understanding of like how to play the game and how to win. Then get into some scouting best practices and kind of, principles behind putting together a good scouting system. Then I'll talk about how to you apply that to decide what data to collect. And then from there, how to visualize and analyze your data. So before we get too into it, I'll just give a very quick intro to what scouting is. And it's this practice of collecting data at competitions to use for making strategic decisions. So it's most often collected by the process of watching matches and taking down some type of data, and which we call match scouting. And then there's pit scouting, which is going and talking to teams and looking at robots in the pits, which is the space of the competition where like teams can like work on their robots and like do maintenance and stuff, and where the robots are when they're not playing matches. And this information is useful for preparing for alliance selection. The highest ranked teams at the event get to choose which partners they'll play with in the playoff tournament. And to do that effectively, it is incredibly helpful to have, clear data, have a strategy, and have data to identify teams that can help you execute that strategy. And it's also really helpful for planning out individual matches, both in your qualification matches, so you can do your best to rank high, as well as playoff matches, so you can, try and win the whole thing. So to do scouting, you need tools for collecting, storing, and visualizing and analyzing your data. So the first step before you even get to doing any scouting stuff is you need to have a mental model of how the game works and how to win. So it's like you can't build tools to help you win if you don't have any idea like how to win. So you should ideally be, taking the time to understand the game in detail as part of building your robot. But you should also take this kind of understanding of the game and bring it to building a scouting system. So it's important to develop your understanding of how to win matches and how matches might play out, what winning alliances might look like, and as your robot comes along and you start to get a sense for what your robot is capable of and not as capable of, like what your ideal playoff alliance looks like and what your role can be on that. So there are a whole bunch of different things you can do to sort of form this mental model. If you were in Joe Blay's talk, he touched on a few of those, like human games. So as far as what I try and do, I try and read the rules inside and out and make sure I understand every single possible way to score and what rules and restrictions are associated with them. From there, I like to just like break out a spreadsheet and sort of just do some quick math with some kind of guesstimate numbers to get a sense for like how different sort of archetypes of robots compare to each other. Like if we have a robot that's really good at the high goal but can't really climb versus a robot that's like really good at the low goal and can climb, like how do they do? So a good rule of thumb to use is that like in a typical year, like an average team can do 2 to 4 full field cycles. Like a good team, like one of the better teams you'd see at your competitions, can do 5 or 6, and like some of the best teams in the world will be doing like 7 or 8. For games where you have some task where you pick up a game piece on one side of the field, drive over to the other side of the field to score it, it's a good rule of thumb. And if you have a game like this year's 2022 game where you don't have to cross the whole field, you're going to see teams doing more than that. And you might see less than that if one of the scoring objectives is like really time consuming. So I try and run the numbers with that and see what I think might work, and also consider the impact of things that aren't scoring but impact the outcome of the match, like defense. You can think about, is there like a protected area where you can shoot or place the object without being touched? If there isn't, team defense might make a big impact. This year, in 2022, there was only one protected scoring location, the launch pad, which was a bit of a challenging shot to make since it was kind of far from the goal. So defense was very effective. Human games are a really good strategy, which, in case you missed Joe's talk, is just a practice of laying out like an area with like the various goals and zones of the field, and then just like having humans simulate playing the game. I really like doing that for getting a sense of how different strategies might work, what the sequencing might look like for picking things up and where it gets scored. And it's just good for getting a more interactive understanding of the game. And then once it gets to be later in the year, once it gets to be competition season, there are a bunch of week 0 scrimmages, which are just like, it's the weekend or 1 or 2 weekends before official competitions start. They'll have like unofficial competitions a lot of the time that have like real fields where teams can practice, and those are good for kind of getting an understanding for like what teams are able to do and how the game typically plays out. If you're not competing during the first week, it's really valuable to watch the first weeks of competitions because you might see that the game gets played out in different ways than you were expecting. And it's really valuable to be able to kind of course correct there. And you can also see what people are seeing online on the Chief Delphi forum and the FRC Discord. Those aren't my favorite online communities, but they can be really good resources. So it's important to take the time to build your understanding of the game and like how to win. You have a question?
Yeah, I did have a question. The human game aspect, when Joe talked about it the first time I heard it, I thought that's great for the drive team, maybe for the programmers, but here in this setting, talking about scouting.
Yeah.
Would you suggest the scouting team go through that exercise as well?
I think the whole team should do it together. I think everyone's better off if everyone understands how the game plays out. And everyone brings such different perspectives to the table. So, like, you might have someone who, on the scouting team, who is used to, like, thinking about games in this very strategic way, who might come up with a different strategy to try out in the human game than someone who's on, like, the mechanical team. Any other questions before we move on? Cool. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to make a good, useful scouting system. And I think of it in terms of 3 adjectives that start R. The data you collect should be relevant, the system should be reliable, and the data you collect should be reasonable for people to collect. And I'll go into what all of that means. So, reliability is really, really important. It's like with your robot. It can be really hard to bounce back if your robot breaks and you lose a match really badly. It impacts your rankings and makes things more challenging. If you're missing data, that makes scouting and analyzing your data more challenging. So ideally, for your scouting system, you're able to collect data for every match that you intend to scout, which should be all the qualification matches. You should have, and I mean this both on like sort of the system angle and also the people angle. Like there should be no technical failures in the system that cause you to like lose data or miss data, and you should have a schedule for like who is going to scout when. Make sure everyone's on the same page about that schedule, and make sure that you have a backup plan in case someone doesn't show up when they're supposed to. Either make sure that people stick around until their replacement comes, or have a few people kind of queued up as backups. Because you never know which matches will end up being like really important data points. Like I'll give you an example from the Tech Valley Regional this year. Is there anyone on 2607 or 2601 in here? Just curious because they spent like most of the qualification matches being a pretty solid low goal defense mid high climb robot, and then their very last qualification match, they hit it it was match 62 out of like 67 they were playing. They hit a traversal climb. They'd never done this before, and they suddenly did that. We saw that. Some other teams saw it, but a lot of teams didn't notice. So they ended up a lot of teams passed on them during line selection because they didn't know they had this capability. And they ended up being the second pick of the number 2 alliance, and they got like a traversal climb as the second to last pick of the draft. Robot 23 of the draft. And I think that was actually a big part of how they upset the number 1 alliance, because they just had this like extra 10-point advantage compared to like a mid climb. So, you might miss the diamond in the rough team that you need to have a shot at winning. And also, like sometimes teams break, and if you're missing data, like it would, it's not. I've been in this position before where we decide to pick a team. We missed a couple matches of that team's data, and they were like, oh, this thing's broken. And we're like, what? So that's not a fun position to be in. And kind of making sure that you have a plan and a good, reliable system for getting all of that data is a really valuable step to prevent that from happening. And lastly, it's really valuable to teach your scouts how to use your scouting system before the competition. Ideally, the competition is not the first time that they're seeing all this and doing this. Like with all things, practice makes perfect. I try to block out at least an hour or two with everyone who's going to be scouting a competition before the competition to just have them, walk them through the sheet, practice filling it out with a few match videos just to make sure that everyone knows what the correct way to fill it out is, and also has a little bit of muscle memory around doing it correctly. So that when it comes to the real matches, they're not learning how to do it. They're just applying what they already know how to do. Next is relevant. Like, this one's pretty self-explanatory. The data that you collect should be relevant. It should be useful. Because otherwise, what's the point? You're just spending a bunch of time doing something that's, not useful. So you should ideally be able to use your data for planning for qualification matches, planning for alliance selection, which takes the form of making a pick list, which is just a list of teams in order based on how badly you would like to play with them, based on your scouting data. So you can use your scouting data for that, and you can also, if you're looking like you're going to be an alliance captain, you can use it to make decisions about which captains you would want to accept if they picked you versus declining. And lastly, planning for playoff matches. So ideally, every piece of information you collect should be useful for at least one of these things. Otherwise, why bother? You're just wasting your scouts' time. And lastly, it needs to be reasonable. The data you collect during the matches has to be reasonable for one person to accurately keep track of and record. And the more you ask for someone to collect, the harder it is for them to do it right. Humans' working memory can only process 3 or 4 pieces of new information at a time. I don't know if that's actually true, but that sounds true. But there are limits on how much new information you can expect someone to keep track of at a time, and you don't want to overtax that, because then they don't choose which things they're gonna be able to keep track of well, and you could end up losing some of your most important bits of information. And lastly, I think it's really valuable for you, the person making your scouting system, test it out before the competition, use it yourself with some match videos from week 0 or week 1. And just get a feel for how easy it is. You'll learn oh, this will be easier to use if I move this thing on our scouting sheet or our scouting app to this area. You'll learn how to make it flow better. You'll learn, oh, this is actually harder to keep track of than I thought, and also maybe not as useful as I thought. I'm just gonna not bother with this thing. So if you, the person making it, can't use it easily, other people who are not involved with making it are not gonna have an easy time. So, before we get further, I want to introduce this idea that isn't necessarily a scouting thing, but is just a general phenomenon that you'll see in the world. It's called the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule, which was originally observed by this dude in Italy in the 1800s, who noticed that 80% of the land in Italy at the time was owned by 20% of the people. And so it's just a general idea that the impact of stuff tends to not be evenly distributed. Roughly 80% of the consequences come from 20% of the costs. So it comes up in, even if it's not that exact ratio, this general idea that not everything is created equal, and some things are a lot more impactful than others, crops up in a lot of areas. And I think scouting is a really good example of that. The more data you collect, the more different types of data you collect, doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing better scouting or you're going to come to better conclusions. There's diminishing returns. You have your kind of most useful set of stuff you can collect. It's also a lot of the easiest data to collect, or most straightforward, I should say, data to collect, and it's the most useful. And the more data you collect, the more stuff people have to keep track of at any given time. It makes it harder for people to collect it, so your data becomes less accurate. So I think pretty much all teams are best off kind of focusing on collecting this easy data, doing it really well, and making sure the most relevant data is also really accurate. And then you can take that data and do good analysis with it. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what data to collect and kind of how to think about that. So, hopefully you took the time to think about how to win and how the game works. From there, you can kind of start thinking, okay, how can we use this data? How can we use this understanding of how to play the game and what we want our ideal playoff alliance to look like? How should that translate to data that we collect so that we can pick those teams to make that ideal alliance? And I like to think of it through the lens of 4 different things, which I call CART: compatibility, ability, reliability, trend. So compatibility is, I would say, probably the most important one. ideally, you don't necessarily want to play with a carbon copy of your robot. Or even like the best robot there might not be the right partner for you. You need to take a look at like what your own robot's strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and think about who would be able to play the game well with you. So this year, for example, if you didn't have a traverse climb on your robot, there might be one team that you might be choosing between one team who's the best shooter there. But if there's someone who's a bit worse at shooting but has a traverse climb, they are likely going to be the better pick for you. Similarly, if you have a traverse climb, it's less important that you get someone else with a traverse climb. If you have an auto that's like really good on the 5-ball side of the field, it's picking a second 5-ball auto doesn't help you a whole lot because you can't run both of them. So you don't necessarily want to just look for whoever has the best autonomous, because the next best autonomous as far as like points scored might be another autonomous that needs the same part of the field yours does. So you need to sit down and like think about like not just who's the best, but who would play the best with me. Ability, you want to have a pretty clear sense of like what teams could do and like what's how good they are. Being able to differentiate between like different robots who are better at different stuff, and like what the ceiling looks like what their best match looks like. If everything goes right, how much can they do? There's reliability, where you ideally want partners who can reliably play to the best of their ability, who don't break very often, and you should have a good understanding of, reliability is good, but you also need to know when it's worth taking a risk on someone who might have had a few bad matches, but maybe when they're working, they're way better than everyone else left, and that's the risk you need to take because you're going to have a tough match. And lastly, there's trend, which I think is a really important idea, where ideally, if you have a team who's getting better over time, that's a team you'll probably want to play with over one that's getting worse over time. Because if someone's getting worse over time, it can be hard to tell if they can get back to how they were playing before when they were playing better. And similarly, and if someone's getting better over time and they finished their quals matches really strong, odds are that's how they're going to play in playoffs too. So it's really important that you have data that lets you understand teams in the context of these things. So, as far as the plan, since your goal is usually, not usually, your goal is to score more points than your opponents, the most important data to collect is generally how much robots score. You can count each time a scoring objective occurs, which is, most years it's very easy, relatively speaking. Some years it's occasionally a bit challenging, especially if you have a game with lots and lots of game pieces. Like in 2017, there were these like wiffle balls that there was no limit on how many your robot could pick up and shoot. So counting those was kind of hard. But aside from that, most of the time, it's a pretty good idea to count how often teams complete the various scoring objectives. And this data comes with the benefit of it's very easy to slice and dice and analyze. In addition to that, counting misses, like failed scoring attempts, is also really valuable for putting that scoring in context. Like if a team, there's, in my mind when I'm looking at data, I think there's a big difference between a team who, does 10 balls in a match, or takes 10 shots in a match and hits all 10 of them, versus a team who, takes 20 shots and makes 50% of them. Like the team, there's a lot more uncertainty around the team who's only making 50% of their shots, but which means that I'm a bit more worried about that team underperforming that. But it's also possible that if there's something they can do to improve their accuracy, they might have a much higher potential than the team that takes 10 shots and makes all. So I think that's really valuable for putting those numbers in context. And I think beyond that, other stuff can be useful too. But it's really important that you stay focused on like what's most important for identifying partners who can help you do your strategy. Like reliability is always a really important thing to keep track of, and I find it. I don't like going too crazy with it, but I think having some very simple data points around whether robots break can be really useful. But like leave the details for like a notes section, which I'll talk more about. I think there's stuff around compatibility that's really important. Like I said before, if you have an autonomous mode that only works from a certain position, it can be really helpful to keep track of where teams start their autonomous modes. So that way you can make sure you pick a partner who, if you want to pick a partner who can do 3 balls reliably and autonomous, it's important that they're not doing that where you shoot your balls, if that's something your robot's good at. That being said, if that's not something you're as good at, it's not as helpful. Like on my team, our autonomous this year, we had like the 2-ball auto that could shoot one, drive back, shoot the other. We can run that wherever, so like the location isn't something that matters much to us. Yeah?
Over the course of does the team's performance ever decline as a competition progresses? And does that have an impact on the way you interpret data? Like the qualification match towards the end of the day might be worse than right at the beginning?
Oh, absolutely. I've seen that happen so many times. Sometimes, robots can be quite complicated things. Sometimes something will break or something will wear down. Like I remember one team at an event it was the 2017 New York City Regional. There was one team who, it was like their 4th regional, and like their shooting accuracy just got like worse as the event went on because it was their 4th regional and that robot had just been through a lot. They were the 1 seed, so we didn't have to decide whether how that should impact picking them. But like when I see a team like that, I definitely get worried that like, which am I going to get performance like their last few matches or like their first matches, which were better. So I'll usually go and talk to that team or have someone from my team go talk to them and try and understand what's going wrong and if they have any solutions in mind, if there's anything they've tried, maybe make a few suggestions. And if it's before the end of matches, if I see them, if they say, oh, we know what the problem is, we're going to do this, and then it should work, and then they go to their last match and it does work, that inspires a lot of confidence. If it doesn't work, it doesn't.
So, you were talking about declining results as the competition goes on or as the qualifiers go on.
Mhm.
Do you mark or indicate whether it was due to defense?
Some years I'll include, so that's something I'll encourage. Some years I keep, if defense is really important, I'll encourage more detailed defense data being collected. That's something that I'll definitely encourage people to write down in the notes section. And that is something that's really helpful to understand. Like if it's clear to scouts why they're struggling, be it, maybe they're having a hard time intaking balls or someone's playing really good defense on them, I encourage them to write that in the notes section. And it doesn't always get captured, but usually if you have scouts who are into it and like watching for those things, it's pretty obvious from the notes what's going on. Or you can go, if it's not, you can go and ask them what happened. One thing that I think a lot of people kind of forget when they're making their scouting system is that you're not limited to just collecting the information that you set out to. I spend a lot of time at competitions, like going up to particular teams and in the pit and just being like, hey, we noticed you had some trouble in this match. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened? And that's something you can do too. You don't have to collect all the data during the match for stuff like that. And lastly, in like a defense-heavy game, you can collect information about defense. The one problem there is that it's kind of hard to do it. Like, it's hard to collect kind of consistent numbers because defense can be pretty subjective. One thing I've had success with in 2019 defense was really important. So like ahead of the championship, I actually like sat down everyone who's going to be scouting at the championship and just showed them a bunch of examples of like really good defense and examples of not as good defense, and kind of pointed out like what made it good, and like kind of said like we had this like 1 to 4 rating system of how good the defense was. And I kind of explained like, oh, I think this one was a 4 because they did this, that, and the other thing really well. And you could see how they really slowed down this team. And I thought this one was a 2 because it wasn't really effective. And I just gave a bunch of examples like that. And that worked pretty well, but it took a lot of work. So I've also found just writing down like who a team, like either keeping track of if a team played defense or if they got defense is also really helpful. Sometimes. And so in a game where defense is heavy, if you're looking at a game where defense isn't going to be that present, a lot of the time it's okay to just leave it to people to write in the notes. Like 2018 wasn't a very big defense year. I don't think I bothered with really collecting anything about defense in like a procedural way. I just left it to the notes and, could look at the notes if needed. Speaking of notes, I think having a note section on your scouting sheet or scouting app provides a really good opportunity for scouts to sort of fill in the gaps. You don't want to try and collect every single thing that happened, or you'll end up with something that's way too complicated and hard to use. But a lot of stuff can come up that might be useful that you're not anticipating beforehand. And the note section gives you a place to do that. And it's important that you make sure that if you collect this information, that you have a way to easily analyze it. And as you're brainstorming what you can collect and what you want to collect, I think it's worth taking some time to think like, do you need this in like a numeric form that gets collected every match, or can it just be a note? Like, do you need to be like, are you going to want to be able to chart or plot this data or like sort a team list by it, or is just kind of knowing that something happened, is that enough? Like, do you need the numbers, or are like vibes enough? Plus, it also gives room for scouts who can be doing this like very like rote procedure of like counting things and writing it down, entering in an app. It gives them room to kind of bring some creativity and intuition to it and kind of provide their own insight. Sorry, the order of the slides got mixed up. So like good notes add new information that can't be gathered from the numerical data that you decide to collect. So like I think some pretty good things to write about, to encourage your scouts to write about, is like driver skill, defense skill if you're not doing any type of number for it. Like if you notice that the robot is like wobbly or tippy, that can be useful, especially if it's like they're tippy when they drive over some part of the field. Or if they have any difficulty like intaking or shooting in general or under like a certain circumstance. Maybe if there's a ball that's like up against the wall, they have a harder time intaking it or something like that. And like bad things for people to write in the notes section is stuff like, that like a team shooting high goals or whatever. That's going to be obvious from looking at your numbers. Like it's important to kind of discourage that because like it's a waste of their time to write that down. It's a waste of a data entry person's job to input that in there. It's clutter when you're trying to look at your data, not worth it. So like, I think it's really worth taking the time to talk to your scouting team about what makes for good notes versus bad notes. And like I said before, it gives a little room to bring some creativity to it and give people ownership of like the analysis a little bit. So this is kind of what I thought. This is not necessarily what my team did. But this is my personal thought about like what was most important to collect in 2022. And it was mostly just like how many times did different scoring actions happen. But the only other things being like if you have a particular autonomous mode that you really want to run that requires a certain part of the field, it's good to collect where people are running their autonomous modes from. Note section, I like doing for as far as like if teams break. I like having them, encouraging them to write details in notes, but having them rated on a scale like, did it happen briefly? Was it some of the match or most of the match? And I think it can be, if you're willing to put in the time to teach your scouts what good defense looks like, collecting stuff on defense skill is pretty valuable. It was really valuable to us this year because pretty much all of the alliances we put together involve 2 scoring robots and then 1 robot playing defense. Yeah. Any questions so far?
Yeah, I got one.
Yeah.
So, for say new teammates, what would be like the best way to explain how to scout?
Yeah, so I think the most valuable thing, I think I talked about this before we got here, but just taking some match videos from like the week 0 preseason scrimmages, or if you're competing later in the season, like week 1 competitions, and just have them practice using your scouting sheet, your scouting app with real matches. It's a little hard to do on like a stream, but if they can, it's still doable, and like they can get that practice. And then if they can do it with a stream, it's easier to do in person, so they'll be able to do it there. It's definitely helpful to make sure that it's not, the competition isn't the first time they're seeing whatever data collection tool they're using.
Thanks.
All right. Let's see, how am I doing on time? All right, 9 minutes. Gotta pick up the pace a little bit. So, pit scouting is easier than match scouting, in a way, like when there's a lot going on during a match, and you have to make sure you collect it all during the match. But with pit scouting, you can kind of take your time a little bit. Because there isn't this hard constraint of getting it done during the match. And, if you miss something, you can always go talk to that team again. I find it's really good for information that is hard to collect from watching matches. This is actually somewhere where I disagree with some of 694's opinions on like pit scouting. I personally don't find it super useful to collect a ton, like to ask teams like what their scoring ability looks like, because my team's going to be putting a whole bunch of effort to collect actual numbers on what they do. And for the first few matches, as far as like planning those out, I'd rather just like wait until match strategy time, like planning the match comes around, and just ask them, what do you want to do? What can you do? Because you're going to get the same answer either way. So rather than do it for all the teams, I'll just ask the ones that I'm playing with. And then eventually, once you get 3 or 4 matches, boom, you have actual data you can use anyway. Because it's kind of less of a crunch time than match scouting, I found it can be easy to go overboard. So when I'm trying to figure out what to pit scout, I try and focus on sticking with information that we'll actually use. And honestly, 90% of the time, I just use information about like what the drivetrain looks like, and not even detailed information, just kind of like, is it like a tank drive, a swerve drive, a mechanism, or something else? Like that's honestly 90% of what I find useful, just because it can be hard to collect that during matches. And that can be really useful for either deciding like if you're picking a team for defense, whether they'd be a good fit for that, or trying to assess how susceptible someone would be to defense. If they have a mechanism drive that can easily be pushed, they likely will have a harder time with a defender who's trying to push them around, and often will have a harder time playing defense. So that I find is the most useful thing. And honestly, you can always get, if you're sitting down to make your pick list and you want to know something about someone's robot, you can always go and just ask them the next day or look for yourself the next day. That's my opinion. Others may disagree. Use your judgment. So we have 6 minutes, so I'll try and wrap this up. But as far as like the data analytics side, once you've figured out what you're going to collect, you need to figure out how you're going to analyze the data. So ideally, what you're using should be, easy to use, make it easy to see numbers and provide and like understand patterns and trends in your data. And as far as like the particular like use cases I like to have available to me, I want to be able to have a sort of discoverability. Whereas if I have these goals for like what I want in the teams I'm picking, I want to be able to find teams that meet those goals easily. If I want a team that has a really good autonomous mode, I want to be able to sort by who has good autonomous modes. If I need a partner with a traversal climb, I want to be able to easily find out who has a traversal. I want to be able to do deep dives into an individual team's performance. I want to be able to understand. I want to be able to get a comprehensive understanding of a team's performance, what they do well, what they don't do well, what they're trending over time. I want to be able to compare teams. So if I have 2 teams I'm looking at, I want to have tools that make it easy to understand them in sort of a comparative sense. Which is really useful if I'm making a pick list for deciding if I want Team A or Team B. And I want to be able to prepare for matches. And as far as tools for building these things, basically, this is the bulk of what I rely on. Averages are really useful for providing a general sense of what a team's performance looks like with something. And it's good for understanding, to some extent, how consistent they are, because, outliers can drag an average a decent bit. If someone has a really bad match, it pulls down their average. It's good for understanding what's kind of typical for a team. But a lot of teams fall into a trap of relying too much on averages and not enough on other stuff. So it's really important that you kind of use that as one tool alongside others. Maximums are really useful for kind of understanding like the best case for what a team can do. Really helpful, especially if you need to take a risk to win a tough matchup, like kind of understanding like what the upside looks like. But similarly, it's one number, you lose a lot of information, so take it with a grain of salt. I love line graphs. I think they're really useful for being able to see a lot of things at the same time. As far as you can see consistency there. You can see trends. You can see what their ceiling looks like. I love line graphs. You can also just make a table with a bunch of information. If you want to just show a lot of stuff and let people analyze it however they want. And I find conditional formatting, which is available in most spreadsheet programs, makes it really good for seeing. You can basically make it so that like numbers in a range are colored a certain way if they're, at the higher end of the range versus the lower end of the range. And that can really help, especially with people who are like more visual and have a harder time just like kind of looking at and making sense of a number. Or people who aren't really used to doing scouting data analysis can make trends pop a lot more. So I will quickly go through kind of the different screens that I like building in like our scouting spreadsheet. I like doing everything in Google Sheets. I think it makes it very easy to like collaborate and like share information in real time, but this stuff applies for however you choose to analyze your data. I like to have a team list. It doesn't need to have this many columns. We went a little overboard perhaps. But it lists all the teams at the event and various stats for them. And I like having this so that no matter what I want to try and find teams for, like what criteria I want for teams, I want to be able to sort by the thing that best approximates that criteria. And just figure out who's good at what. So I have a whole bunch of things here. You can sort by whichever one. So if you want someone who's really good at tally out high goals, you can sort by that. If you want keeping climb well a lot, you can sort by that. There's also like average total points scored across all scoring objectives, and there's also max. So that's like a good general rough sort of team skill. And like sorting by max total points is really good for identifying like high risk teams who can who you need when you need to pull off that upset. I like having, I'll try and keep this quick because I believe 2:15 is time. I like being able to have a screen where I can enter in a team number and see like a very detailed breakdown of like all their information and like graphs and stuff. Like this graph does a good job of like telling the story, like the overall story, the trend and performance and whatnot. And I can also see all the notes here that our scouts took, as well as the detailed breakdown of the data. I also like having a comparison sheet, which makes it easy to kind of compare two teams. And usually I just do it as kind of having a smaller version of like the lookup page and just put two of them next to each other and make it easy to see side by side. I also like having a match prep sheet. This isn't very sophisticated. This just grabs average and max scoring for each of the robots in the match and sort of averages them together, which provides a good like high level sense of like, okay, is this going to be like an easy match or a hard match? How should we kind of plan for it? And it can also be used to simulate potential playoff matches. And then if I want more details, I go to like the lookup page for that team. And just lightning round of how I use this for actually picking. So we agree on whatever we want to, what we're looking for in teams and what our priorities are. Then I like to sort the team list tab by whatever number best approximates what we're looking for. So at a few events, this was just sorting by average points. For the team, I was helped for 74-7 at Champs. It was a lot of spending time looking at like the tally up high goals column because they had a really good autonomous mode. And then I just like can take the top two teams based on whatever I sort it by and kind of decide which of them I'd rather play with, which one should be higher on the pick list. And then from there, we just kind of go down the list one by one and like build up the team list. So like when we were at Champs, we kind of decided, okay, we'd rather have 67 than 176. And then we went to the next team and 59-40, looked them up in the team lookup thing, got a sense for them, and just gradually built out the list that way. And then once you do that, you can sort by other things, see if there are teams that you missed, and that's kind of how I go about the very quick explanation of how I go about making a pick list with these tools. And I think that we can skip this conclusion time. So that's pretty much it because we're at time. But I'm happy to stick around and answer questions that people have about this or anything relating to scouting. Also, if you go to this link here, linktree.com/gettingpicky, there are other scouting resources that me and a friend of mine put together that are, I think, pretty good. And these slides are going to get uploaded wherever the event organizers are uploading them after, so you'll be able to see them.
That one?
Yeah, this will be there. Questions?
How are you so awesome to have more like you?
Maybe I was born this way, maybe it's me boring.
Who's the Martians?
Afternoon. So when you aggregate your data, you were using the word lookups, are you using H and V lookups, or are you using like Power Pivot?
This is mostly like H and V lookups and like index matches and whatnot.
Yep.
And on the team page, where you have that big set of data.
Yeah.
No, one maybe before this, where there was.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the columns.
Yeah.
My curiosity was down here, because like from a distance, I could see that it was different, but I could see it was just justified itself. Yeah. I thought it was immense.
No, I don't know what happened.
No, it's. And then with pet scouting,
Yeah.
my experience is that it's somewhat trash, right? Because you're talking to someone and they're telling you what they believe their robot can do.
That is the other
Versus
part
what
that
they
they
have
maybe
to
get
do.
into. But yeah,
So
that's
they
a big
say,
part.
oh, we can reverse, we haven't done it yet, but they leave that last part of the sentence out.
Yeah, and also even though when they're talking about things they can do, people like human memory just gravitates toward the best and most successful behind
Good things, not bad things.
Yeah, they were when I when they ask how many balls their robot can score, they think of whenever in their practice session they scored the most because that's the most memorable.
In a 20-minute session versus the very timed sessions that we have.
Yeah.
Very good. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, of course.
Did you figure out who you did?
I have no idea. And I don't know what to do about it.
You had somebody.
Actually, no, you could. Wait, you already called.
I'll go to like you said. Okay. Alright, thanks.
Early.
That needs to be. Just log in.
No, it is Ivan's account.
Alright, now you go.
Okay. Sign into my account.
I turned off the stream. You might want to like unplug for a sec. Oh. Nope, it's fine. It's fine. Why don't you just get your slides from Slack or something?
It's fine. We're chilling.
I think it'd be fast.
It's fine. We have like it starts at 2:30. We're like 8 minutes like ahead schedule.
Wow. you're,
Yeah, I
like,
know, right?
Way better than Max.
Oh yeah, I'm
8
way
minutes
better.
late.
Okay, so I am this presentation, and then do I plug it back in?
Yep.
What the fuck?
Don't worry, don't worry. It just does that. It's just software.
Send me the password. Because I'm gonna post my notes.
Ready?
Yeah, just present it.
So if you can see it, if you can.
Do I just like start at 2:30? It's like
You can start whenever.
all right. I'll start at 2:30 because I think everyone might be like in like the other lectures. So
With Daniel.
This downstairs can be different.
No, that's. It's like future of CAD.
Future of this robot. And 5 minutes. In 5 minutes. Go to Gilder, you came to my lecture. Thank you. Let's go.
Why did you give you a group?
The lecture hall B was not working.
What,
The
screen?
professor was broken.
I was there during the time. They couldn't get it. I defected to search chair. It was a rolling chair. Wait. Sean took the rolling chair.
No, here, we can have a chair. Here.
Let's go. That was the rolling chair I was talking about.
Expecting the odor. Let's go.
Yeah, thank you. Can I say?
I had it.
But the slides is over there.
I'll see him.
Okay.
I was in there in the beginning of the last lecture. Like, it was some kid on the screen that I could get in. It's like, oh, I was like suggestion, so I was like, I'll do it. I'm just sitting there.
Wow, that's in this type of even if it's
I even posted here to say 3 or not 6.
not sequential.
Not 6 forms?
Yeah. Is there an extra chair? Do we have extra chairs? There should be a chair right here.
I think so, Matt. There's a back row.
Is anyone sitting here?
No.
Okay.
Here we go.
Wait, is that?
Someone else is. Wait, is there anyone sitting here? I don't think you're coming back.
Should I just give it to you? Oh, yeah. I have like a shower.
Should I sit down?
Yeah.
Sit down.
Alright, so we'll start in like 3 minutes. Oh, but they never watched it.
It's something. My response times are really bad.
It's like I sent it like an hour later. Oh, hi, yeah. It seems like days, yeah.
I thought everyone did these like last night. My mentor here, Ryan, the guy who was here before,
Yeah.
did that last night.
No, like, no, okay, so like yesterday, I came from the meeting and then, basically like, we hopped into a call, like, helping, and then after that, we got like a brief, and then most of the people in the call were like presenters for StuySplash, and so we were like, oh, did you finish slide? Nah. And it was like 10 p.m. and we were like, okay, let's get midnight, let's go.
So you guys were planning some soccer days, is it right?
I mean, really depends, but like, we were working on it.
Is it? The 3-inch wasn't small. Yeah, but
They're tiny.
why did you mean there's tiny?
I was a buff one.
They're both well. No, he's like the ones that won't like collapse over tiny wire. That one is like a small wire.
Like the bar.
Oh
yeah.
When someone looks at the ground, it's like, I'm scared.
Going back to 2018 StuySplash, it was like 5 of us who crashed in the presentation system we had. We were all starting to hear lectures at like 2 a.m. It was, the people fell asleep, it was like, yo, is he done?
This is the on.
It was like, what's the pressure?
I mean, the floor's awesome lecture.
It's after like 5 a.m. from bro. I'll see you, but like.
Okay, so I think I'll be starting. So today I'll be presenting about how to incorporate CAD into your FRC team's design process. It's by me, I'm Sean. So who am I? I'm a senior on StuyPost. This is my 5th year in FIRST and my 4th year in FRC. And this is my 2nd year as the director of design. I've also been working on drivetrains and bumpers for the past 4 years. and I've been helping lead Swerve, and this is my second year doing that. So what is CAD? It stands for Computer Aided Design, and it's commonly used in the industry to design products. And so there's like the pros and cons of CAD. The pros, it saves time on the design process, and it allows for simulations using like, I guess, assemblies and parts, and also allows you to collaborate with others on the design. The cons, it may be time consuming to learn how to use the product, and then also like the price of the software. That's not really an issue for students because most companies offer like a free option for like educators. And so here, this is like a wind turbine engine, like a turbine engine in CAD. So deciding and transferring softwares, you might be wondering which CAD software to use. I don't know like where you guys are in terms of like, I guess, using CAD. Some of you might be beginners, and like some of you might be like using a CAD software already. And so I'll just be covering the commonly used CAD softwares, which is SolidWorks, Onshape, Fusion 360, and Inventor. And so how do you choose your CAD software? So you should ask yourself these questions. Can your team's computers handle the software? So an issue with using SolidWorks is it typically requires like supercomputer like processors to like handle it. And so that's like a factor in, I guess, determining which CAD software you want to use, and how easy is it to use it, and what resources are available for the software. So like many companies, they provide like documentations or like tutorials for using a specific software. There's also like, I think YouTube tutorials out there for like certain softwares. So that's good. And also, how can you collaborate with your team using the software? So like an example is here, SolidWorks, it doesn't really have like a collaboration option. So we have to use GrabCAD Workbench to share files with your teammates. And so Onshape is great for, I guess, collaborating with your team. So which is why it's like a great software for FRC in general. So we came upon, I guess, this decision making as well, I think 2 years ago. And so our original software was SolidWorks, and we used it from, I think, 2014 to 2020. But since our season was cut short due to COVID, we had to find a new option to onboard new members in CAD. And so I guess a big part of this decision was SolidWorks was hard to run on most team members' computers. And also required, like, as I said earlier, an additional collaboration software. And so we also knew that a lot of FRC teams were using Onshape, like, or also preparing to shift to Onshape. And so we were like, should we stay with SolidWorks or should we transfer to Onshape? And so I made this pros and cons for both SolidWorks and Onshape. So comparing the two, the pros of SolidWorks has more features compared to Onshape because I've used both softwares, and I think SolidWorks assemblies, they have more features. You don't need an internet connection, and there's also like great documentations on using SolidWorks. And the cons for SolidWorks is it's hard to run on most members' computers, as I said earlier, and also it requires an additional collaboration software. And Onshape, the collaboration part is already incorporated into the software, so you don't really need to worry about that. It's more accessible to team members because it doesn't really require a big like computer to run, and it's easier to organize parts of assemblies in a single document. Because SolidWorks, you have to like download the files onto your computer, and it kind of gets messy over time. And so there's also like great documentation and tutorials on using Onshape. So the cons, as I said, SolidWorks has more features compared to Onshape, and so that's like a little con. But like in FRC, like in general, I don't think you really need those features, so that's good. And it requires an internet connection, but that's not like, I guess, a big factor in cons. So, all right. So since we made the decision to switch to Onshape, what we did was we prepared to learn how to use it, and then as well as how to teach new members. And so in addition, we also create an Onshape team for collaboration. And so our team name right here is StuySplash 694. And what we did was we established our organizational system with files and folders. So right here, we grouped our folders into, I guess, seasons and years, as well as like commonly used like folders. Like we have robot archives, which is our past robots in SolidWorks from 2014 to 2020. And then we have 2023 season, 2020, 2021, and then also 2022. And we also have like 2 separate like folders for like step files of other teams' robot CADs, as well as like regular 3D printed parts. And so basically robot archives, we basically transferred CAD files from GrabCAD Workbench onto Onshape. So learning and teaching CAD to your team. So our team, we host something called CAD education, and it typically takes place in the off season. And so we spend like several weeks teaching how to use sketches, parts, and assemblies. And our rough plan for like doing CAD ed, we spend a week on sketches and a week on parts, which is a build off on sketches. And then we also spend a week or 2 on assemblies. So what I've learned is practice is very important when you're learning how to use CAD. So like from my own experience in my freshman year, like we also had CAD education, but like I don't think it was that effective because I didn't learn anything from it. So later I learned that when you're doing practices, it helps you, I guess, get used to the software and how to use it. So that's a very important part in CAD education. So in recent years, I've tried to do like, I guess, giving members more exercises and more hands-on things to practice on. So, so since we hold CAD education in person, so we cover the content and then we give members the exercises to complete. And so we walk around, we assist those that need help. Oh yeah, this is a photo of me from last year teaching CAD. So as I said earlier, practice is very important. So our team also hosted, I guess, 2 design competitions over the past 3 years. And so the goal is to give members practice with CAD on a larger scale. And so you actually get a CAD like a robot. So I guess a very good benefit of design competition is it allows both engineering and software members to work together in groups. And so that helps, I guess, improve team communication between the 2 departments. So engineering, they CAD the robot, while software, they program it. And so our process is we usually pick a game from like previous years. So from like the past design competitions that we had, we chose 2020 Infinite Recharge and also 2018, which is Power Up. And so we create a rubric on how to grade the CAD and code. And we set a deadline for when the CAD and code is due. And we basically kind of sent out a survey to like the members, and whoever's interested in participating, they sign up, and we group them into like multiple groups. And so throughout this entire process, we host design reviews with groups, like the judges. We meet with the groups individually to provide feedback on their CADs or code. And then after the deadline is passed, we grade the submissions and then we release the results. And so a perk of this is it can be hosted online, which is what happened for the past 2 design competitions that we hosted. And that way it won't interfere with like in-person meetings. And so that way you can maximize your in-person meetings as well as giving members a way to practice CAD online. And so since I guess our team is using CAD, I've put together a list of Onshape resources. So Onshape has something called a learning center, and they kind of like put together like some videos and exercises, and it helps you learn how to use the software. And that's personally how I learned how to use Onshape. So the MKCAD library will be covering that. It's a library for, I guess, common FRC parts. So it's up here. Feature scripts, we'll go in depth on that later. So it's like a kind of like a simpler way of creating like parts. There's like Onshape documentation, Onshape forum, and that's where the documentation is where, like, I guess the description of the bunch of like Onshape features are listed, and like they tell you how to use that as well. And then the forum is where you can ask questions if you're like confused on something. And they also like kind of they provide like a weekly, like I think, update on what they changed in like Onshape, and so that's pretty useful. So the learning pathway, it's located in the learning center, and so as I said earlier, it contains videos and exercises on specific topics in Onshape, and so these are like the two highly recommended pathways I suggest you complete. So that's CAD Basics and also Onshape Fundamentals CAD. And as of right now, Onshape they're currently making a pathway dedicated to robotics competitions. So that's VEX, FTC, and FRC, and it can be found here. You can find the slides, I think it'll be posted. So you can just like click on a link. And from what I've kind of like tried it out myself. And I think it has good exercises on using MKCAD, which we'll be covering later. But there's also like other useful learning pathways you can check out. So there's like data management or like advanced like surface modeling. So you could just like try those if you want to. But these two are like I think the most highly recommended ones that you should do. So useful Onshape features in FRC. So MKCAD, it's a library created by our FRC team 1836. And before, it was not really like an app. It was kind of like a bunch of like documents that group like parts. And so they recently made it into an Onshape app. And so when you add it to, I guess, Onshape, it saves you from downloading and importing common parts. And you could access it in both part studios and assemblies. Before, it was only accessible in assemblies, but they changed it to include part studios. So now you can edit, I guess, whatever parts that you need. And so how do you add MKCAD? So you just go to the Onshape App Store and you search up MKCAD. And when you subscribe to it, you can just log into any Onshape document. And I guess on the document right side, you should see an MKCAD icon. So like right here, down here, it should be there. So once you click on that, you can authorize the application if this is your first time using MKCAD. And that's how you add it. So how do you use it? It's pretty self-explanatory. So basically, you can import parts from the library onto your Onshape document. And so the interface here, there's like, I guess, a bunch of folders and drop-downs. And so those include, I guess, your parts. There's also like a search bar feature up there. So you can just search up whatever parts you want. And so I think that's pretty useful. So to add the part, you just simply just click on the part and I think it'll import it directly into the document. So that's pretty easy to do. Oh yeah, so note that some of the parts inside the library is configurable. So you have to make sure to change the specs before you add the part into your document. So now feature scripts. So these, I think, are kind of hard to use, depending on like, I guess, whichever feature script you're using. So Onshape has this scripting language that they released that's designed for working with 3D parts. And so many of the Onshape features that you use are hidden feature scripts. So extrude, fillet, etc. There's also more. But there's also like feature scripts created by other users that you can use. And what it does is it helps speed up and simplify part making. So like for example, I think the most useful feature scripts I've used is like created by, I think, other users, like FRC belt generator. Also there's like a spacer generator. And the lighten feature helps you with pocketing. And there's like a documentation on feature scripts if you want to learn more about it. So how do you add features? Well, in your document, there should be an option to add custom features. So on the upper right area, there should be, I guess this icon, this plus icon, and it's an add custom features icon. So once you click on it, you should have this drop down right here that says add custom features. And so there's a bunch of different ways to add your features. You could, I guess, go into one of these folders. If you have like your feature script in those folders, you could navigate to those. Or you could also paste the URL or just search it up in the search bar. And so there's like some useful feature scripts in FRC that's located in this link. So you could go on the slides later and then just navigate to the link and then add the feature scripts. So some basic Onshape data management. So Onshape has version control, and so versions exist. And so what is a version? Well, it's basically like, I guess, a snapshot of a specific time frame in your document. And so when you create a version, you're basically creating like, I guess, a little like area where you mark off a place in your document that you can't modify. So when you create a version, you can't modify it, but you can actually view it, and then you can revert your document back to the versions if you wanted to change it. And so to, I guess, get to this place, there's like up here on the upper left portion, right underneath like the Onshape logo, there should be this logo over here. And once you click on it, you can access the version history. And so the versions here are named like V16, V15, and so on. And so it also includes like, I guess, the timestamp of when you created those versions. So branches. So when you create a branch, you're kind of like creating another like alternate universe. So you're basically creating an alternate like workspace for you to work on. And so branches are useful because you can use them to experiment on something and not worry about messing up your main branch. And so here, this is our Climber document, and we have a bunch of branches here. Like you can see like some of these branches, they kind of just like end off right there while like other branches continue. So that's because if you're not satisfied with a change in the branch that you made, you just leave it there, and those are called sandbox branches. And it's perfectly fine to leave those because those are like experimental features that you did and you were not satisfied with them. However, if you have something in a branch that works, to merge it with your main workspace, you should navigate to the workspace that you want to merge into. You right click on the branch that you want to merge, and you just simply click merge into workspace, and it automatically merges the changes that you did in the branch with the main workspace. So that's something that's really good. Okay, so comparing history entries. So Onshape allows you to compare versions, branches, or workspaces to see what changes were made between them. So you could compare version with another version, a branch with another branch, and I guess a workspace with another workspace. And this only works for part studios and not assemblies, which I don't know why. So it's a great feature to, I guess, visually see the changes that you made rather than viewing the changes through like a long list of entries. Because if you were to go back, you can see like Onshape, there's like a drop down here that says like show changes, 10 changes. And so Onshape automatically keeps like a log of whatever change you do. And so it's kind of like comparing history entries like allows you to visually see the changes that you made rather than viewing them through a list. So to get to this, here I'm comparing version 13 and version 14. And so there's an icon. Oh, my bad. There's an icon over here. That's your compare history entries. And so once you click on that, it prompts you to select either two versions or two branches. And so here I'm comparing versions. As you can see, I'm in a part studio. So that's my one-piece bumper that I designed for our 2022 season. And we can see that once you select, I guess, the versions you're comparing, you can see like sketch 1 does not match with sketch 1 and so on. So those are, I guess, the changes that you made between those two versions. And up here, you can see that there's, I guess, this like drag option, I think, the scale option. So basically you can basically visualize what the document is displaying by moving the slider over from version 13 to version 14. So right now it's displaying version 13, but if you use the slider and slide it over to version 14, it will change on the screen. And so it will display something else completely different. And that's basically it. So you might have noticed that this is kind of similar to GitHub if you actually used it. So like the GitHub version like control is kind of similar because it uses like branches and such, and also allows you to like view whatever you change. And so that's a pretty cool option. So to revert a change, let's say you made a mistake and you're like, oh, I have to revert it back. So there's a bunch of different ways to revert changes back. You don't have to make a version to revert your change. So as I said earlier, Onshape keeps a log of every change you make. And so right here, we have a list of log entries that Onshape did over like, I guess, timestamps. So every change you make in your document, Onshape automatically logs it and puts it on this long list of entries. And so you could go back to its specific time frame and you could right click on it, and there should be an option to restore to main. So you're restoring that specific change back into your main workspace. So, but you can also, if you don't want to do this, you can, I guess, revert back to a specific version once you create one. So that's pretty neat. All right, so how do you organize your CAD? So we use, I guess, we have a file naming system for our parts and assemblies. And so, as you can see, once your CAD gets messy, it's useful to name your files in a specific, I guess, naming convention because that helps keep it tidy. So for parts, we have our mechanism number, we have a part number, and our part name. So an example of this is 0101 and chassis rail 29-inch. So typically, in the beginning of the build season, our team, we assign, I guess, identification numbers for our mechanism. So like drivetrain is typically 01, and an intake is like 02, and so on. So we have 01 as the mechanism number, and then the part number is like which part, I guess, the sequence of parts in your part studio. And so it could be like 02, like chassis rail 29-inch, if that was my second part studio. For assemblies, the full robot assembly will be 00 and then robot assembly. But if you were to have like subsystem assemblies, which I highly recommend you do, you have your mechanism number and then 00 and then your mechanism name. So the reason why the parts studio we don't start with 00 is because 00 is reserved for the subassembly. So an example would be 01, the mechanism number, 00, and then drivetrain assembly. So in Onshape, you have to remember to name the actual part itself and not just the Parts Studio tab. Because when you import parts into assembly, the part name will show up inside your, I guess, assembly, and it'll be confusing if you didn't name it. So when you, I guess, extrude or create like a 3D part, Onshape defaultly names it like part 1, part 2, part 3, and so on. And if you were to import those into an assembly, it will show up as like part 1, part 2 if you didn't name it. But if you did name it, let's say like I made like chassis rail 29-inch and I renamed the part and I import it into an assembly, it will show up as chassis rail 29-inch. So be sure to name the actual part itself, because some of our like members, we didn't do that and the assembly got kind of messy. Oh yeah, so using separate documents for robot CAD. So we kind of learned this the hard way, but it's a good idea to make a document for each mechanism and then have another document as your main assembly. So during our 2022 season, we originally had all our mechanisms in our main assembly grouped into one document, and it kind of caused a lot of problems. It made the CAD really laggy, and so like the load time was really long. And at one point, only people with powerful computers could actually open the document. And so that was really bad. And then also reverting back to like a specific version or change caused a lot of problems for other mechanism leaders. So if you don't know what that means, I can give an example. So let's say someone's working on intake and someone's working on drivetrain, all right? And all of a sudden, the intake person was like, "Oh, I made a huge mistake. I have to go back an hour." But then the drivetrain person's like, "I just fixed something." And so if you go back an hour, then the changes in the drivetrain mechanism will also revert back. And so you're like, "Oh, so what can you do about it?" So basically switching to like separate documents for each mechanism helps a lot because then you wouldn't interfere with reverting changes back. So yeah, when you're using another document as your main assembly, you have to create versions in your mechanism documents to update the main assembly because it requires that as such. So some good practices. Make sure your sketches are fully defined. And what that means is it's fully constrained and fully dimensioned. And you could tell by, I guess, going to your sketch. And if the outline is blue, that means it's undefined. And so there's like parts, like the sketch entities, they can move around. And if it's like, if the outline is black, that means it's fully defined. And so that's good. And only one part in your assembly should be fixed. If you need other parts fixed in a certain way, such as belts, you can use the group feature to do that. Sketches, parts of the assemblies, they should use the origin in a reasonable way, because once you, I guess, once you like add, okay, so the origin is very essential in, I guess, defining a sketch. And when you import a part in assembly, when you make a part and you import that part into assembly, it's pretty important that the part kind of like, once you import it into assembly, the part should be at the origin. And same thing with assembly, you should use the origin because when you measure out, I guess, your center of mass in Onshape, it's kind of revolved around the origin, and so that's really important. So yeah, you have to make sure none of your part studios and assemblies contain errors. Pretty much it. CAD in our FRC season. So we host something called a CAD marathon, and it usually takes place during the second week of the build season. So what we do is we come to Stuy, we CAD most of the robot over the course of a weekend. So we just basically CAD for like several hours straight on Saturday and Sunday. And this is like pretty important for us because that way we can have, I guess, all the mechanism leaders in a single room. And that way we can ask each other questions if we have problems with something, like integration purposes. And so that helps a lot. And then we finish up CAD over the course of the week and order parts. So if we don't finish during CAD marathon, what we do is we go home, we hop into a call with like other mechanism leaders, and then we figure out the CAD from there, and then we also order parts on our own time. So CAD and design reviews. So hosting design reviews is a good practice to get into. So what we do is we have like mechanism leaders meet, and we discuss this either in person or on a call, but we do it usually on a call. So what we do is we talk about what we did in CAD, what we plan to do, and we also bring up concerns. And usually that's integration concerns. And we address those problems because we have everyone in a single call talking and like planning out what we should do. And so this helps us catch mechanism errors and also integration problems, which is really important. So CAD really never stops in FRC. So our robot CAD is always undergoing changes throughout the season because we're always, I guess, iterating or experimenting with something in our mechanism. So it's a good practice to keep your CAD tidy. And also using CAD, it opens up a lot of paths in your fabrication process. So using CAD files, you can 3D print parts, but you can also use CAD for CAM, computer-aided machining. And so that requires CAD files and drawings. So CAD is pretty important in FRC and also in the industry. So I guess it's a good practice to get into using that. Do we have questions? Yes. So from my experience using Fusion, our team, we use it for computer-aided machining purposes, but we don't use it for CAD. But personally, I've used Fusion for rendering, which I think is, I guess, mid, but I've never used it for CAD. Any other questions? Yes. How much percentage of everything you use from the library versus how much you make from scratch? Oh, so if you were to use custom parts, you would just like, I guess, make the part in the part studio. But I think a majority of our RoboCAD is importing parts from CAD.
Or in assembly.
Yeah. Or you could do it in parts too, because they recently made that an option. Yeah. Yes.
So do you put just the entire loop of the second entire loop of abilities and just CAD the entire thing?
So during CAD Marathon, we plan to have most of the robot CAD'd, I guess, during the weekend. But if we have to, we just finish up the CAD over the course of the week. And then, yeah, we order parts. But also, like, our robot CAD is never final until, like, our last, like, off-season competition. And so that's why, like, our robot CAD is always undergoing changes. So, like, I guess CAD never really stops. So, yes.
So now that you changed from to Onshape, how do you see the two? Like, are you upset that you went to Onshape knowing that you were in SolidWorks and go back?
So, I guess my experience, in my freshman year, I learned how to use SolidWorks. And then I used it for a year. And then my sophomore year, we changed to Onshape. I was kind of initially upset. I think a lot of other members were as well. Because we had to learn a separate, I guess, software. And like, I think SolidWorks and Onshape, they overlap a lot. But like the assemblies part is way different. Because Onshape uses like mate connectors and such. While like SolidWorks, you have to use like multiple mate features to connect one part. So I think, like I was like initially upset, but then, like I think Onshape is like much easier to use, and it's also like I guess easier for new members to use. So I think that's good. Yeah.
So I've been on this team since 2015, so I kind of foresaw the change going in. And I will say, just overall, the whole process of Onshape has been a lot simpler. Like just being able to see changes like right away. Like with SolidWorks, everyone would be working separately and then pushing changes randomly. And then some people wouldn't realize that somebody made a change to act until like later on when you try to like on GraphCAD or something like that. And just it's like the Google Docs kind of like CAD. Like I compare SolidWorks a lot to Microsoft Word. Has a lot more features, is better in like a professional setting, but for something like students, for like collaboration and stuff like that, like a classroom kind of setting, I'd say Onshape is more the way to go, more personally.
If you're designing a part that you want to machine, you could design it onto it and then export it out, or are you gonna completely design it somewhere else?
Yeah. So you do the CAD and Onshape, and then you export to Fusion, and that's where we do the CAM.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like, as soon as you start designing, right? How do you like delegate out like, you have however many team of you on your CAD design team? How do you delegate who's gonna do what?
Right. So that's a good question. So personally, we have mechanism leaders, and so those are people who are in charge of specific mechanisms. I'm in charge of drivetrain. So basically, what I do is I guess most of the CAD work, but for the other mechanism leaders, they CAD their own mechanism. And then for integration purposes, we host design reviews. So basically, I have to like I guess go through everyone's CAD, look through them, be like, oh, is there a problem with this, that? And also, Mr. Blay, our team mentor, also, he looks through the CAD on his own time and gives us like feedback on like, I guess what they changed and such. So, yeah.
So during a CAD marathon, is the CAD side of your team building the robot at the same time?
Okay, so our build season plan is like the first week we do everything like prototyping and such. The second week is a CAD, and then after that is like we order the parts and we start building the robot. So the CAD, I guess marathon is just all CAD. We don't build anything, but we do have our prototypes there to like reference. So I guess kind of like depends. Yeah.
So how you would design it in Onshape, but then transfer it to Fusion. Why do you do that?
So I'm not in machining, so I can't really speak for them. But I don't think like Peter, do you know like?
Sorry, I missed the question. Is on down.
Okay, so the question is, why do we CAD and Onshape, and then transfer that CAD to Fusion.
Just the support with the machinery is a lot better. You're able to export them as native, like, and something, I don't remember, but just the people that we've had on the past in the team that work with the machines, they in the past had a lot more knowledge of Fusion 360, so that knowledge has been passed down personally in their team, so that's why I was kind of stick to using Fusion and just exporting it. The process is fairly simple. You just send over through email or just upload them to a Google Drive and let them know what to the machine and stuff like that. So it's very easy regardless of what they use. You just export it as well.
You can go.
If we have to outsource the machine process, we also have to do account planning and send work to this stuff part of the.
Can you repeat that? I couldn't really hear.
If we have to outsource the machine process, we have to do the account process one, or do the something like.
So I'm not sure about your team, but we have sub-departments, and what we do is our machining department, they're in charge of machining. So our design team, we do the the CAD, and then we give them the CAD files, and they take the CAD files and they do their machining stuff. So yeah.
When you guys design, do you guys lay out all of your dimensions for what the subsystem inside of the master sketch?
Oh yeah, so master sketches are a pretty big thing. We started doing that I think last year, so my sophomore year. So yeah, master sketches are I think a pretty big deal. I guess laying out. Yeah.
2 questions. What is the master sketch? You said that you gave certain people certain mechanisms using the drivetrain. How do you decide?
Oh, so that's a very good question. So, okay, so basically we give people we make people mechanism leaders based on whatever mechanism experience they had in the past. So for me, I started working on drivetrain as a freshman, but then once COVID hit and I came back in person as a junior, I was really the only person who had experience with it. And so I became mech lead. But for the other people, they also had experience with some other type of mechanism that's kind of related, which is why they were made mechanism leaders. So that's how our process goes.
And also, what is the master sketch?
Oh yeah, master sketch. So I guess there's a couple different ways to define it. So in Onshape or in CAD softwares in general, master sketches, you can use those to create multiple parts out of a single sketch. But then what he was talking about in the master sketch was an outline of an entire robot. So I think pull up an example. Let's see. Oh. Okay, so this was our robot from last year, Infinite Research of the Home. So basically, this is a robot layout. These are master sketch and entire robot. So we have four modules over here, and this is Spinexer. We have our chimney over here, and then it's basically a placement of where we should put the mechs. So that's our master sketch. Yeah, any other questions? Yes.
How do you guys structure post-season or after two? What do you guys do after the period when you do your main part?
So we do the CAD, we order parts, and I think once we're ordering parts, we're waiting for the parts, we do more design reviews and see if we have to change anything and if we have to order additional parts. But the parts arrive fairly quickly. I think within a week or so. So it's like we don't have to wait too long for those to start building. Any other questions?
How do you find assemblies in Onshape?
How do you find assembly?
Yeah, like are you having, I've heard people don't like doing assemblies in Onshape.
Oh. So, as I said, like on-shape assemblies are pretty different from, I think, solid assemblies. Like they have something called mate connectors, which are, I guess, like connectors that you can use to mate features. And so, how I learned to use it was through the Onshape learning pathways. And so in Onshape Fundamentals CAD, they have a section dedicated to assemblies. And so if you were to click on it, you can scroll down. And so there's a section here, Onshape assemblies, and that's where they teach you, I guess, how to make stuff in assemblies. But it's like, I think my experience was like, it was kind of weird because in SolidWorks, it required like a lot of mates to mate one part, while Onshape, you could just like use a single mate and then just complete the same task, basically. Yeah. Yes.
When using MKCAD, right? When you import the files, can you only import them into assemblies, or can you also import subfiles?
Okay, so I think earlier in the season, they didn't have the option to import into part studios. It was only assemblies, which is why our 2022 CAD was like, we had MKCAD in our assemblies. But I think over the summer, they recently changed it so that now you could import MKCAD parts into your part studios. So that's a very good option. Yeah.
When should we revise it?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think like probably a third or more of the robot is 3D printed because our entire shooter hood is printed and we print spacers instead of like buying them. So I think it's a pretty big chunk of the robot. Oh yeah, also our intake wheels are like 3D printed. Our mechanism wheels, those are 3D printed. And so the benefits of having like a bunch of 3D printed parts is it's light, it's strong, it's also like pretty cheap to I guess make. So that's really good. Yeah.
You use PLA.
Yeah, so we use PLA or ABS. Those are like the two main materials we use. All right, so if you have any questions, my email is on here. I have a StuySplash email as well, but I prefer my personal because I don't really check my StuySplash one. Yeah.
So, like, there's some examples.
Was it boring? What do you mean, is it boring? Was it boring?
I zoned out a bit. What I recommend next time, before your lecture, play it back to yourself. You can definitely skip over some parts.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, that's what I always do. It's like when I do the thing, I then record myself taking the presentation, and I go through and I'm like, which parts am I skipping through? Like to cut that part.
That's such a chat thing.
Yeah.
Hi, Lisa Flatley, Daniel. Jimmy.
Yeah, this was the one.
I was a finance major. I was a finance major.
Wait, they
We don't have only like 17 people.
17 people on your team.
We don't have any. So that's what
So are you asking how to like manufacture parts without like a 3D. You could do that, yeah. It's like we did that over the summer. So there's a machining service called Sen. So yeah, you can send it down. You can just like put in drawing. So like CAD drawing. Yeah, Sen. So they offer machining services, but if you have the budget, definitely get a 3D printer. It's really useful. Yeah. I didn't pass. Oh, okay, so I definitely recommend using the learning center. That's how I learned Crochet myself. So,
My phone's like 10%.
Oh, it's you.
Okay. That's very, yeah.
Are you? What? Wait, are you going after this?
Where is it?
Innovation. Just when you leave, let me know so I can go back to it.
Okay, so yeah, onto learning pathways. So these two, yes, pathways, I highly recommend those. CAD basics and onto So the assemblies, like they have to make sure that there's like that's what you do. That's a great fun. Oh, so yeah, like the thing when the exercise is adding something, so that's like pretty useful. Email? Yeah, sure.
And the parents' method is really funny because we have the old version. Well, this is now tested.
Funny. Oh yeah, you're yeah, more questions? So yeah, if you have questions, reach out to me through my personal email.
I was just curious, do you guys, as a department, you guys
So, the only people who really CAD are like the mechanism leaders. But we do have a machining department. So we have like, I think, a few members learn how to do machining and machine our parts for, I guess, for the code season.
So after you guys finish the main CAD, the members kind of disperse in meetings to do like the machining side. And I was curious if you guys have like a specific CADing post-season, like a post-season project.
Oh, like in the off season or?
In the off season, yeah.
So off season,
Is it just the
we have competitions. We also have like R&D projects, so research and development. So my project is STUR, and I've been doing that for 2 years now. There's also like other, I guess, projects we do. So, I mean, you can CAD in, I guess, while working on the projects, but it's like also building it as well and doing like electrical stuff.
Sorry. Our teams are just changed so different.
What team are you from?
Juju 6.
Oh, I see.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I was just wondering where you're gonna post the slides.
Oh, give me a second.
Okay.
Okay.
I have to write out my question before I.
I can't. So quick. It's like I have.
That's so like hilariously cute.
I think you can check our website, but if they don't put on a website, just reach out to me through email. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why is there a lightning
Stop. Go. I'm pushing you. Go. Okay. Okay. You said you guys do non-shape, right? But let's say, okay, so we use Fusion. Can I learn on Onshape but use like apply it on Fusion or something? Like, would it have the same name?
So I'm not too sure about Fusion because I've never used that for CAD. I think the interface is like kind of similar-ish, but the controls are different. But
Like, is it hard to adjust from different?
it's not hard to adjust. Once you learn a CAD program, it's pretty easy to like transfer to another one. But like some stuff might be different from the other software. So yeah, I mean you could try to apply what I said here, but like I'm not too confident because I've never used Fusion myself. What do you mean? Like for like hosting like lessons and such.
Yeah.
I think StuySplash is like hosts it's like once per year. But if you have like questions, just like reach out to me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's cool.
What's the new? Oh.
Yeah, you can just sign up the account.
Okay.
That's why I put some. We're not supposed to. It took a lot.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have this supposed to.
No, I've been doing this for the past, how many meetings I've been here?
Upset. So.
We have our team split every day. We have some care on this and like.
We only put up to it. Down in this one's sponsored.
And those part section maybe uploaded, so that's it. You found everything. It's hard.
Only genius. The final.
That's yeah. I was up like 400 pounds. 140.
We want to we didn't even try to get there's no check for us to go for that says it's on the
That's against like stuff. You know, not you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a link in tomorrow? Yeah. Can we go?
Or something like that.
Maybe he's like, I don't know. If we can, so. Actually, there's some. We have to shoot my. Oh, what's the app here? Maybe with that we can. It was look at this, it's so cute, right? Look at the Christmas. I had those. So was pink. Yeah. Oh. The first one.
How to shoot it. Just about.
It's a you gotta go over, there's wait, take me a sample. You see that cute little right? It's the same thing, like it's pretty gentle, the accent is how it is.
One thing that I learned from
Cute, right?
you know that we should probably do like this year too, we should probably do it.
Wait, you know, you did this once. I think it's so good.
Dewey, just Dewey. We have the Dewey thing, it's automatically have. In every school that we say Dewey, just why in our house.
Like, you know,
Yeah.
What's happening?
is it the one in Washington Heights? I moved there. Say hi to my boss.
Yeah. Tomorrow.
Say hi to my boss.
You need a password, someone knows your password in school. I don't know.
Which one is it? Sunday. It's teaching me how long. This is not. This is totally not. Okay, so then you have to move to the opposite.
The dog
It's supposed to be a lot more. So they get all the different terms, everything.
Yes.
So they can double check.
That's exactly what we have. Maybe young me and my colleague also helping us with just feel wheelchair. It's good enough. Cause then I lost it. I'm really using it. So we have to do 16.
That's the only reason why I keep the electrical work.
Just tell someone to yeah, this is I need to
Actually, you're so stupid because.
So are you guys
No, like, it's very.
I mean, and if you don't. You want to use it on the red, you think it's really bad. That makes it really bad.
Okay.
I mean,
I just need to
this is not, this is Joanna. This is like, I can't. This is the, can't use that for like tools or types of things.
No, it doesn't have But she never get
She said, I get up.
I'm gonna go to the innovation hall. Alright, see you guys.
Yeah. It's like, it's kind of like 6 of it. It's like millimeters. Yeah, it's like, look. That is like so bad. Let me see what I'll do. I'm pressing this. There's doubles. So you sad about it.
everything matching. You're incredibly.
It was like every we're gonna be a good person there, right?
Yeah, this is actually.
I like everything matches. Jeans is I can
Okay, that's not it. Like, I don't know how to
No, this thing.
Yeah. There is.
Hello, are you yeah, okay, cool.
So Tuesday.
The rooms are ours? The other rooms? Yeah. No, they're still going. Yeah, the one in lecture hall A, is, goes for two, like 2 time slots. So yeah, they're still going.
The Daniel stuff? Daniel.
Yeah, but Daniel's not good.
Should be a requirement. My dad.
All right, let's get this party started. Thanks everyone for coming to my session. I know you guys had 3 to choose from, so hopefully mine is the best of the day and the most useful for you guys. 2 questions before we get started with my presentation. The first is I'll want to gauge how many of you guys are part of like rookie or like newer teams, and then how many of you guys are like a part of more veteran teams. So like just 1 or 2 buckets. Raise your hand if you're like part of a newer team. Okay, and more of like a veteran team. Okay, great. And then grade level. So if you're a freshman, raise your hand. If you're a sophomore, raise your hand. If you're a junior, raise your hand. And if you're a senior, raise your hand. Okay, cool. Thank you guys for that. So as you can see, this is Impact 101. I also put a little plus 201 there just because I'm going to go a little bit more in depth on certain aspects of Impact. But here's the agenda for today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about me first. Then we're going to dive into what Impact is, what the Impact Award is, the criteria for it, general tips and advice, things you guys should be looking out for, and then takeaways and moving forward. So really going to try and keep this interactive. I know every presenter says that, and then it always ends up just being a monologue. So feel free to ask me questions throughout. I will save like 3, 4, 5 minutes at the end for Q&A. And then obviously I'll be here afterwards as well if you guys want to like come up and just ask me individual questions. But hopefully this is an informative session for you guys. I think it's a pretty cool award, pretty cool topic. But with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So about me, my name is Philip Liu. This is a little bit about my background. So I went to school at Westlake High School in Austin, Texas. I was on Team FRC 2468, Team Appreciate. And I was on FRC for 3 years, from 2015 to 2018. Prior to that, I did 1 year of FTC, and then prior to that, I did a competition called Best Robotics. It's almost like Bex. But essentially on 2468, I worked on the Impact Award. I worked on the business plan, the fundraising, the robot, kind of the whole 9 yards, but I really specialized more towards Impact later on. After that, I went to Duke University, as you can see by my sweatshirt, studied mechanical engineering, economics, and entrepreneurship. And currently, I work at NBC Universal, like the TV media company at Rockefeller Center, as a program manager. And then I just moved to New York in July, so I found Stuyvesant and 694, and I've become a mentor for them for Impact. Thank you. Okay. All right, so a little background about me. Why am I qualified to talk about Impact to you guys? Why should you take anything that I kind of say with and use for your teams? So I have a lot of experience in Impact. Prior to it being called Impact and rebranded this year, it was known as the Chairman's Award. The picture on the left is our team at the St. Louis Championships before it got split into Houston and Detroit. We won Engineering Inspiration at the world's level, which is almost like second place Impact you could consider, but more of like a local community focus instead of other things. In the middle is a picture of me and Dean. We didn't have a championship level kind of recognition that year, but during my 3 years on FRC, we had won Chairman/Impact at the regional level every year. And then the picture on the right is my team and I being championship chairman's finalists in Houston. So top 3 teams kind of winning Impact there. So as I mentioned before, kind of working on the submission aspects, so like the essay, the video, the short answers, the presentation, working on like the fundraising aspect, working on kind of everything related to the Impact submission, which is why we're here today. So what is the Impact Award? So this is directly copied and pasted from the first website, and I'm going to read it just so that you guys kind of have the awareness. So the first Impact Award, formerly the Chairman's Award, is the most prestigious award at FIRST. It honors the team that best represents a model for other teams to emulate and best embodies the mission of FIRST. It was created to keep the central focus of FIRST robotics competition on the ultimate goal of transforming the culture in ways that will inspire greater levels of respect and honor for science and technology, as well as encouraging more of today's youth to become science and technology leaders. So long story short, what does that actually mean? The Impact is the team award that is for the model team, the team that genuinely has the most impact in their local community, in their school district, in the FIRST robotics environment. And basically, you're trying to make a positive difference outside of the robot. It's not about the competition. It's not about how well your robot performs, but it's can you inspire others? Can you teach others? Can you get others motivated? And that's really kind of what it is. One really important aspect that I want to emphasize here is that you should never kind of go into the Impact Award trying to win the award. The award is a total byproduct of what you do. You should go out there to do outreach, to kind of do community service, and then you're recognized with the Impact Award for your accomplishments and kind of for your efforts. I'm going to read something from the FIRST website, and I think it really captures kind of the spirit. So the award is a byproduct to give you recognition and a platform in support of your achievements and hard work and positive difference. Awards generate interest and awareness for your team and FIRST. They also help engage potential sponsors and help expand FIRST in your community. So I really agree with that sentiment. So that kind of want you guys to have that mentality through the rest of this presentation with it. One thing to point out, it's not relevant to you guys, is that it's not possible for a rookie team to win Impact just because you have to be around for like 3 to 5 years to really make an impact. And it's also not possible for teams who won Impact at the championship chairman's level or championship impact level to win again until 5 years removed because they've just won and not much has probably changed. So kind of going back to this definition here, best embodies the mission of FIRST. I think it's really important to kind of know what FIRST is. Obviously, you guys all know what FIRST is. But I was at a competition once in 2017, and a judge literally came up to me and asked, what is the mission of FIRST? And I recited it word for word just because I had known it. And he was like, you're the only kid I've ever met in like 6 years of being a judge who knew that. And we won the award at that regional. But I think it's really important is because when you're kind of campaigning for impact and kind of doing the work for this, you really need to understand what you're campaigning for, right? You need to understand what you're trying to spread, what the message is. So I'm not going to read that, but the mission of FIRST is up there. And I kind of identified these 8 main kind of bullet points of things that you guys should really kind of know going into competition. So, you know, the mission, the vision, you guys should know about the history of kind of FRC and FIRST. I mean, just kind of like fundamental stuff, you know, just like it's not going to make or break, but it is kind of like things that you should kind of know, almost like in your college applications or something. It's just like the About Me section, right? You would need to do your research on the school. So the Impact Award, what does it really boil down to? It really boils down to what we like to call outreach. Outreach is going out into your community, reaching out to other FIRST teams, reaching out to schools, and just kind of giving them opportunities that they wouldn't have had you not gone there. So these are 3 pictures that I physically took when I was in robotics from 2015 to 2018. The one on the left is a STEM camp, bless you. It's like a robotics camp. So basically, all these students here were first-generation college students, so their parents, they didn't go to college, but they would be the first in the family to go. And essentially, we hosted a week-long session for them, free of charge. So we brought like the Lego Mindstorms, the EV3s, whatever. We had our team, it was a big team. It was like 60 kids. And basically, we just like partnered with them. So it was like 4 kids per each of us. And we just taught them and had them like play with the robots the whole week. And really taught them like the fundamentals. The middle is like a regular kind of outreach event. So we went to the park in like a community like kind of family day. And we were just kind of bringing our FRC robots. And that year it was shooting a yoga ball. So we brought an old robot and, you know, we had them play with it. And then on the far right is political advocacy. So kind of like campaigning and kind of getting more awareness and funding for FIRST teams in general. So that's just like 3 kind of examples of things that you might want to do in your community. But what actually goes into impact? So what is the official criteria? So on the left-hand side are the things that are officially quote-unquote judged by the judges. The first is a written submission. It's a 10,000 character essay. It doesn't really change from year to year. It's basically just like, long story short, tell us about your team. In addition to that, you have 13/14 500 character executive summaries. They're called executive summaries, but they're really short answer responses. So that they're like 3 to 4 sentences. Some of them are like, describe how your team gets sponsors. Describe how your team is involved with your school community. So they're really kind of straightforward, but they really supplement what you write in the essay. So it shouldn't be the same information. Otherwise, you know, what's the point, right? You should really be bringing in new information for this. And this submission is due February 16th. And it needs to be submitted before that deadline by either a student or a mentor. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Next is the presentation. So when you write the written submission and you go into your regional competition, the judges will have read all the team's written submissions. So they'll do their homework, right? They're basically like college admissions counselors looking at all the different students, but the students in this case is our teams. So they're going to know what your team is about, So when you go into the presentation, you want to reaffirm everything you talked about in this written submission, but also bring in new evidence, right? Because again, what's the point of the presentation if you're just going to recite your essay? With that, after you do your presentation, there's going to be 5 minutes of Q&A. This is really important to practice because again, as you can kind of tell, it's an opportunity to bring in new information to the judges again. But it's also a good time for you to kind of like freestyle. And when you freestyle, you want to make sure you're coherent. You want to make sure that you kind of have your facts down because it all goes in, like your overall impression will go into the judging. You also want to have visual aids for the presentation. It doesn't just want to be, one person up here monologuing. Maybe you want a poster, maybe you want a slideshow, maybe you want, I don't know what it is, but definitely important to kind of like supplement that. Then the last thing is the video. So this is a 3-minute long video, and it needs to be done before the competition because you essentially turn it in at the competition. So once your presentation's over, you basically give the judge a labeled USB flash drive saying, this is FRC 694's chairman's video. And then they look at it, and if there's like a tie between different teams, this is what they use to like break the tie. Because when the when the judges judge who wins the award, they literally just like sit in a circle. There are 3 judges who judge the presentation, sometimes 2. But they like sit in a circle and they go, all right, this team did this team is really good here, whatever. And they just write them all on a whiteboard and like rank them, and then like they circle the winner. And then sometimes there's like a tie, so that's what the video is used for. And then if you win the Impact Award at your regional, they play it for everyone. So it's good to have like a nice quality video. So some call-outs on the right-hand side. I talked about eligibility already. One thing I want to point out is it's a non-robot award. So your team can have maybe not the best designed robot. It's not performing great, but don't worry. That's not what the Impact Award is about. Really, the Impact Award is what you do the other 98% of the days of the year, not the 2% of days you're in competition. The submission process, I talked about this before. You need to have a student or a mentor do it. I always like to have students do it just because you really feel that ownership. And then the award judging process, I kind of highlighted that as well. There's a lot of good teams, so you guys should really meet others at competitions and kind of learn who you're going up against as well. And then this is from the first website as well, from a different link. I put all the links at the bottom of the slide so that way you guys can have them later. But really, if you want a good definition that's not so abstract, it's the measurable impact on your participants for your team, the school, and the community at large, with emphasis on what's highlighted there in blue, promoting science and technology through FIRST programs. So it's great if you guys go out to the community and you kind of teach people how to read, but that will help for impact, but it's not really the main gist. You really want to do it through FIRST programs, and you want to promote science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, which is, as we all know, is STEM. The last thing I'll call it here is that only the last 3 years of information is relevant. So for example, if your team started team 1, 2, 3, 4 in 2015, you really can't bring that up in the presentation. You can, but the judges won't use that as a factor because only the last 3 years of information will be relevant for them. And you should practice. That's goes without saying, but you should practice your presentation. You should edit your essays, edit your short answers, all that stuff moving forward. There are other factors as well that aren't technically judged, but they're really important to kind of consider. The first is pit interviews. So outside of your regular presentation, like your 7-minute presentation, 5-minute Q&A, judges will literally walk around the competitions. And for those of you guys who have never been to a competition because of COVID, the pits is the area where the teams work on the robot. So it's this picture here. So each team has a 10-foot by 10-foot by 10-foot cube. They put the robot there, whatever, and it's behind the competition venue typically. And literally judges will just walk up and down, they'll hold their clipboard, and they'll just be like, hey, I'm a judge, tell me about your team. So it's really important to have designated people there. What I recommend is having one of your presenters or someone who's not a presenter but very familiar with impact standing in the pit at all times. Because if a judge comes and says, hey, tell me about your team, tell me about your impact, and your presenter sitting in the stands, by the time they come down and talk to the judge, who knows what someone will have said to the judge, and then also the judges have a finite amount of time because they got to get to all 40 teams at the competition. So it's really important to be prepared.
Please attention, could Laura Noxie please meet his teacher, Mr. Bianchi, by the first floor security desk. Laura Noxie, please come to the first floor security desk. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Laura, for interrupting my presentation. But it's really important to have someone there just because you want to make the most out of that time because the judges take what you kind of say and what you present in the pit interviews into consideration for the overall award. The second is your social media. If you're a team kind of making an impact, obviously, you want to have like a good Instagram or Facebook or Twitter and YouTube. You want to give you want to post your chairman's video, your impact video, so other people can see it. You want to have like season recaps. You want to do maybe like workshops. Like 694 is probably going to post most of these presentations to their YouTube. So that's like something that's really good. The third is a website. It should have updated content on what you guys are doing. It should have contact information, like an email or a web form or something. Fourth is team engagement and reputation. So this is really important. Basically, long story short, you want everyone at your team at competition to just be really engaged, right? You want to be really positive. Like you don't want to have kids sleeping in stands. You don't want to have kids cussing out other teams like, oh, their robot is so bad. You don't really want to think those thoughts, but if you do, just keep them to yourself. Judges like really take that all into consideration because one kind of mess up by the 50 people on your team at competition or the 20 people on your team can disqualify you for the award completely. I was a judge for not Impact, but for other awards in FTC and stuff, and there was like one team that was like 100% like the best overall team. Like it was the best robot, the best like Impact submission, but for FTC, like the best everything. And then like we found out the kids were being like super cocky and like making fun of the other teams. Like the judge, like the head judge, literally just crossed them out with an X and gave it to like the second team on the board. So super important that you guys like just kind of keep that good reputation and like really keep that like spirit of first goal. Last is supplementary materials. So these are like kind of like additional things that you should have ready that either the judges will request or you can give to the judges and they'll look afterwards. So the first is like a portfolio. It should be like a list. This portfolio is like a list of all the different events you guys have done, stuff like that. Handout, so you're gonna need a one-page summary of your team. Like what are the things that you guys do? What are your team demographics? What's your kind of robot like this year? Just like a quick, one-pager. You should have a business plan. Not every team has to have a business plan if you're not like going for the sustainability award or anything like that. But it's good because it all helps, right? Nothing hurts in this regard. And then, if you want to be like a well-known team kind of over time, develop your buttons, trade shirts with other people, get your swag up, stuff like that. So now we'll kind of dive more into like the 201 section now. So first, resources. So this is a screenshot from the first website. Super, super helpful. I put 2 links here, but the first one is basically a chairman's chat. Chairman's is Impact. They basically over COVID interviewed like the lead chairman's judges and had a bunch of kids just ask questions about the award. And it's all recorded there, and the Q&A and questions and answers are all posted there. So whatever you guys probably want to ask me, they've asked it to the official judges. There are impact award definitions. So this is really important as well because there needs to be consistency across teams. So for example, like what's the difference between starting a team, mentoring a team, and assisting a team? These definitions are standardized here, so you can use it in your submission, as well as like when you're talking to in your presentation. And then the other thing I'll point out here is that there's a list of all the different winners from the past like 6 years or 7 years or whatever. So you can literally click on like the PDF, see every single winner at every single regional, and then there's like a hyperlink to their essay, their presentation, and their video. So you can like almost do your homework and like kind of learn about other teams and like see what they're doing and find it really interesting. And then lastly, there's the Hall of Fame, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So for your team specifically, what do I recommend? I recommend a lot of things regarding infrastructure and planning. So with your infrastructure, I think it's really important that you guys have a dedicated sub-team for the Impact Award and really all your other awards. But a team that meets weekly, just because there are so many things that go into the Impact Award, right? Like if you think about it, you guys basically have 2-3 months before the essay and the submission is due. If you do a weekly meeting, that's only 16 meetings before it's due, right? Like 4 times 4 or whatever, or I guess that's 4. So 12 meetings. So it's really important you have a weekly meeting just to kind of gauge progress. And then outside of those meetings, you guys should have like working sessions. I recommend a shared calendar just so you guys can keep on track. And one platform, I really like Google Drive just so everything is in one place. But the more things that you guys have, the more you're going to be like using brain power for things that shouldn't be used for. For planning, I recommend you guys create a high-level timeline, what you guys want to accomplish, and when the due dates are. Every year, you should start out your season with goals for the year. So goals for the award as well as goals for your actual impact. So hey, we want to reach out to 10 different teams and we want to mentor them. Or hey, we want to start one FLO team. Or whatever the case is, I recommend you guys start that season with those goals. And then during the season, identify roles and responsibilities. So that way, hey, Andrew's in charge of the business plan, Jason's in charge of making the one-page handout, and Alexa is going to be our lead presenter in addition to the other two. And then every year you should also end the season with a postmortem, like a reflection. How do we do? And how can we get better? This is probably the most important slide that people won't necessarily tell you, but I think is super, super important. You need to document everything you do because impact is not a 1 year award, it's a multiple year award. So I recommend coming up with 3 spreadsheets. One is for outreach events, and these are kind of the columns that I would recommend. But basically, you guys are going to want to know what you did and how you did it. The second is corporate sponsors, because obviously none of this can happen without money from them and other kind of resources. So have that here. And then volunteer hours. This could be grouped with the outreach events as just a separate column, but it's really important because this is a super important statistic that judges care about. And long story short, you're going to need to kind of, in your impact submission, provide quantitative as well as qualitative evidence. Basically, you're going to want stories, testimonials, anecdotes from people, but you're also going to need hard numbers, right? We mentored X amount of teams. We volunteered X amount of hours, and everything like that. Then you get to the foundational things. So I think it's really important that you guys have a team summary or a mission statement down that every single person on your team knows. You should know your team history because your team goes back to before you were in high school. You should know your demographics. You should know your finances, alumni. And when I mean you, I mean the 3 presenters and whoever's going to be talking in the pit. It's obviously great if everyone on your team knows, but definitely those 3, 4, 5 people. You should have a bunch of photos, videos, quotes, and testimonials all in one place, preferably like a Google Drive or something like that. And then you guys should be consistent, right? Like how many times have you guys seen a presentation where someone puts on a picture and then there's a white square background behind it and it looks super ugly in 2005? You want to make sure you have really consistent branding guidelines, logos, everything like that. This is probably the most important. Just come up with this. Have a working session one day with your team and come up with a mission statement. What do you do? How do you do it? And why do you do it? This is kind of on the other slide, right? The top right, the team summary, the mission statement, really understanding that and having that kind of nailed down. And you should use that to develop kind of some high-level categories that your outreach events fall under, right? So, we do X, 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 and X. Those are our main things, right? So you want to convey this to a judge in 30 seconds so they can ask you more questions. Some other considerations. So the way kind of impact works is that there are a bunch of different regionals and a bunch of different district championships. When you go to a regional and you win the impact award, that makes you eligible to compete for the impact award at championships. If you don't win at a regional, you can't compete at champs. Then at championships, all the different teams compete. There's 4 different rooms because there's so many teams from across the world. And basically, you do the same thing that you do at the regional level, but at the championship level. And these are all the winners. So the competition level is really increased. Then from kind of the championship level, they identify 6 finalists. So the top 6 teams at the start of the final day of competition. And then on the last day, they announce the winner. In front of everyone, you get to meet Dean Kamen, it's a big deal, whatever. But the really cool thing is that if you win, you get put into something called the Hall of Fame. So 1 winner each year. It used to be 2 when there were 2 championships, but with COVID, they combined it into 1 championship again. But when you're in the Hall of Fame, your team gets to go to first championship for the rest of time forever. You're automatically qualified. You don't have to win the robot. You don't have to win impact. You don't have to do anything ever again. You're always going to be a championship. Everyone will really respect you. You're going to have a huge platform, like an influencer, that's going to be able to kind of share your message. So it's really cool. Who doesn't want to be a part of the Hall of Fame? Who doesn't want to kind of be automatically eligible to go to championships every year? Because that's what some of the benefits of the Hall of Fame are. Some other awards that are really related to impact, engineering inspiration. I said this was kind of like the second place award earlier. It's a completely different award, but a lot of teams who are successful in impact are also successful in engineering inspiration. Engineering inspiration has a greater focus on your local community versus impact is more widespread. So for example, if you guys are to look at other teams, you'll see that a lot of teams do outreach in Asia or something like that. That's more impact than engineering inspiration. Engineering inspiration might be more like your elementary school. But don't be kind of swayed one way or the other. They're both fantastic awards. And then the third is Rookie All-Star. So as I mentioned, rookie teams can't win impact because they're rookies. But Rookie All-Star is kind of the way that paves the road forward for all of that. So last slide here in the interest of time so that way you guys can ask me questions. Moving forward, what are the things that I recommend you do starting right now? 5 things. So the first is you guys should just get involved with outreach and events in your community to kind of spread the first message and awareness. Say yes to opportunities as they come up. Unless something is really pressing and you need your whole team focused on one thing and you have to say no, say yes. And if there are opportunities available, go make your opportunities. Reach out to people, reach out to your middle schools, reach out to your community center, see if you can demo a robot, see if you can help someone, but that's kind of the first one. The second is to develop your team's infrastructure. So that's that slide here. Really kind of work on the infrastructure and the planning, so that way you guys have a good foundation going forward. And obviously best to do this as early as possible. Start preparing and refining your entire impact submission. On that slide, it was kind of in order of priority. So work on your essay and short answers first. Use that to help frame your presentation. Use all of those to help make your video. And then after that, then develop all your handouts, your portfolio, and everything else. 4, learn from other teams and their impact efforts. Other teams have been doing impact for a long time. Some of them are really successful. Some of them make a true, genuine, huge impact. I have 3 videos linked here when you guys get this deck that I really liked when I was in first. I'm sure there are a lot of good videos, but I'm not aware with the things that are kind of new. The first one is the team from Australia. They won Sharon's in 2017. Their video is awesome. It's just like a super pump up, like high motivational video. And obviously they won it all. The next is my team, 2468 from my senior year, so I'm in the video. But I just think it's like a really nice, well put together video that really conveys kind of what my team and what we were about. And then the third is a team from San Diego called the Holy Cows. They won at the championship level 9 years ago. But I think their team does a really good job in their video of just like telling the story of how First and their team impacted their students. And then lastly, like I said, I gave you guys a bunch of resources throughout the bottom, like all the different links on these slides, as well as that dedicated resources page. Definitely look at that, because while I gave you guys a really good overview, in my opinion, there are definitely a lot of more resources and things that you guys should just read up on just to get a better understanding of the process and the award. So that's that. Obviously, I wanted to cover, or I could cover a lot more. This presentation was a lot about the how, as opposed to like what you should actually cover content-wise. But if you guys ever want to reach out to me, there's my LinkedIn. I'm not going to give you guys my personal phone number, but if you message me there and you like show initiative, I'll respond to you and I'll give you guys feedback and help however I can. But hopefully this has been helpful for you guys. Hopefully you guys learned something new. And does anyone have any questions? And if you don't have questions for the group, I'll also be around here afterwards. Yes.
Hi, I'm from Team 636, and I wanted to ask you 2 questions.
Yeah.
First is, what should a portfolio include? Because in the beginning you talked about some other factors that we should have in it, and I just want to know, like, for our portfolio, what can we include?
Yeah, great question. So the portfolio should really be kind of a summary of what, let's pull it up, of what this is. It should really just be like this. There's actually a PDF on the First website called, let me get the exact phrasing for you. It's the First Impact Award documentation form. So it's basically a spreadsheet, like a table, but put in a PDF. So just if you make it like an Excel or Google Sheet, you can just transfer it over later. But really, it's just like a collection of documentation of the events that you guys did, how many people attended, how many volunteer hours you had, give a short description of the event, something like that. And then when I say keep it in the pit, every team likes to do it a little bit differently, but I actually recommend just bringing it into the presentation, and then at the end of the presentation, leaving it with the judges, because the judges will look at anything you give them. So, once you finish the presentation, they'll like start flipping through your portfolio, which is probably like, anywhere from like 2 pages to like, I don't know, 50. And like, if you want to put pictures or something, right? And you can just like, they can start looking at it, and then you should also keep one in the pit as like a show and tell kind of thing when the judges walk by. Good question.
Thank you.
Your second?
Yeah, and the last question was, what are some effective outreach opportunities a nonprofit team can work with? Because our team is a nonprofit organization, and sometimes we struggle with like reaching out to outreach companies or like other opportunities because we're a nonprofit organization. So.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think it really depends on your individual circumstance, but I think that community demos and just spreading awareness that you guys are involved in robotics, you guys are building really successful robots, and you guys are learning a lot is really important, because you never know who's going to see it. Like if you go to like a I know this is New York City and not Texas, but like if you go to like, let's say like a Barnes and Noble, right? And you demo your robot, you don't know who's gonna be shopping in that Barnes and Noble and like gonna see you guys, and who knows like how many opportunities and doors that'll open in the future. I think if you have the opportunity to kind of work with younger students, so in elementary and middle school, I think that's really important as well. For example, just to go on that other point, we were doing a community outreach event at like our convention center in Austin, and one of the producers for the Transformers movie saw our robot, thought it was super cool, got the contact information of the kid that was demoing the robot. This was 2014, so I was still in middle school. And then long story short, they kept in contact. Then he like talked to our head mentor, and then he got our robots in Transformers. So our robots in Transformers 4, our logo is the logo that Mark Wahlberg uses for his robotics shop. Like Jaeger Robotics, like it's the little bird that I had on my first page. But it's just stuff like that, right? You never know. So just like constantly get yourself out there, put yourself out there, and that's kind of what I would recommend.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? We're technically at time, but obviously this is the last presentation of the day, so. Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for coming. Hope you guys learned something. I'll stick around for a couple minutes, but appreciate you all being here.
I'm from
Okay, I think we should end next month.
Yeah, sure. You can just message me. I can probably help you guys. I don't know if I'll message you like consistently. Like I don't know if it'll be like every twice a week or whatever, but feedback 100%.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So,
Okay,
you guys are sharing this deck out, right? You guys are sharing this X out? You guys are sharing this PowerPoint out?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
thank you. Yeah.